says William Temple, when advocating in 1770 that poor children be sent at the age of 4 to workhouses, where they should be employed in manufactures and given 2 hours of schooling a day, was explicit about the socializing influence of the process. There is considerable use in their being, and this is William Temple now, there is considerable use in their being somehow or other constantly employed at least 12 hours a day, whether they earn their living or not. For by these means, we hope that the rising generation will be so habituated to constant employment that it would at length prove agreeable and entertaining to them. So
Wow. Even if you don't get your money's worth, work them like dogs.
I was thinking about those lines on schooling and the discipline of children in their time, because I don't know if you all have been following this trend on TikTok of teachers talking about students recently. I'm not entirely sure what to make of it. For those not familiar, there's like a trend of teachers getting on and talking about how, like, specifically like elementary and middle school students are like years behind where they're supposed to be. They're unruly and like have all these like behavioral pathologies.
Can't pay attention,
like,
can't read.
Don't know where they are, what's going on. And alleging that this has to do with like, you know, long after effects of COVID, having lost 2 or 3 years of important young early socialization. They're now ill-equipped. On the one hand, like, this seems plausible and possible, but on the other hand, like, these aren't studies, these are anecdotes. Who knows? This could be a trend. And I was reminded of that when I was reading this stuff. It was like, oh, okay, right. For hundreds of years, people have been complaining that the youths are unruly idiots who need to be disciplined harder and better.
Ultimately, the concept of time discipline and management was invented and decreed by the rich, by the elites, by the capitalist class, for the specific purpose of making people accept their value or their role as wage laborers. Schooling in the West has long been intentionally designed to create a workforce, going back to the days of British apprenticeship, not the apprenticeship. I think I had to clarify that. In the 19th century, Sunday schools rose to prominence throughout Britain, characterized by this adherence to rigid time discipline. The superintendent shall again ring when, on a motion of his hand, the whole school rise at once from their seats. On a second motion, the scholars turn. On a third, slowly and silently move to the place appointed to repeat their lessons. He then pronounces the word begin. This rigidity in British schooling has been criticized by many over the years, including famously in Pink Floyd's The Wall, and though we don't see it often taking the same shape of this dramatic control of students' time and the punitive measures, we still see the DNA of a lot of this stuff in modern schooling. Institutions like the Michaela School in Britain proudly retain the same practices alongside the title of Britain's strictest school. It's not particularly coincidental that this school is in a poorer area of Britain, depicted as a resource for its students, many of whom are black and brown. It all ties back to that quote from Temple. There's long been a perception that working class students, children, especially racialized ones, have a unruly attitude. They have to be fixed. They're little demons that we have to discipline. And we have to discipline them into understanding the value of devoting their entire life to work. And that work is not something that empowers them or enriches them. It's just work that is for the good of society because it puts money into a small group of people's hands. This perception is rooted directly in the conception of time as a currency, as something that you have to spend according to what is most valuable. Even as education became universal in Britain, its foundation was on a type of education that dehumanizes children, that forces them to think of their time as money. And this is part of the process of orienting people to make themselves productive. In other words, to mechanize themselves, using as little time as possible to get as much done as possible. How am I gonna get them to not roll their eyes here? As Zendaya says in chapter 10 of Capital Volume 1, capital is dead labor that, vampire-like, only lives by sucking living labor, and lives the more labor it sucks. The time during which the laborer works is the time during which the capitalist consumes the labor power he has purchased of him. If the laborer consumes his disposable time for himself, he robs the capitalist. Today, all the school systems around the world have internalized this concept of time discipline to the point of being dominated by it. even when teachers